Give it a second. Let it breathe. I think I am live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the announcement portion of BIO201. We are in week 13. I'm your professor, Dr. Shawn Clavell. We are right in the tail ends of the semester here. If you are in my online or in-person class, congratulations on how far we have made it. As you'll see on the schedule and in the modules, we are due for a exam at the end of the week here. And we have one more system to review, or one more system to cover. Let me get my whole head in the screen. We have one more system to cover, and that is the nervous system. So let me see what I can do here. There it is. So here we are, week 13, the week that falls right here in between the 16th and the 17th. We are finishing the muscular system. We've got the exam here today, or opening tomorrow. We'll go over that. But then we have week 14, 15, and 16, the last 3 weeks, where we will focus on kind of a boot camp of the nervous system. So chapters 12, 13, and 14 are what we'll be covering. We'll be talking about the different types of nervous system tissue, the different connections that occur. We've got 3 labs set up as well, where we'll do a, actually we only, I think has 1 or 2 has 2 labs set up. My in-person class has 1 more lab left. And we'll be doing the sheep brain dissection in this section as well. So we'll be doing the sheep brain dissection. And my in-person class will have a worksheet. You guys will have an online completion. But here we are, and again, so just to note that your final will not be comprehensive, but it will cover the material related to the nervous system. So it'll be the material related to the nervous system, and so that's what you guys will see as it relates to the final. You'll have a final. It will not be comprehensive. It will kind of cover just the nervous system. But I think you guys are more interested in this exam number 5 that we're about to present here. That's the one that opens up tomorrow on Thursday. It will close Sunday at midnight. It will have 2 parts to it, just as we've seen with in all of our traditional components. We'll have and it'll go over chapters 9, 10, and 11. Remember, chapter 9 is joints and articulations. A big component of that will be body movements. So being able to identify any of those different body movements. Chapter 10 is muscle tissue, so the gross and microscopic anatomy of a muscle, as well as the steps that occur in a muscle contraction. And then finally, the chapter 11 is really just focusing on all of those different muscles that you see in the textbook and in the slides. The big component here is the muscle master list. So in all of your modules, at the bottom of each module, you'll see that there is a list of muscles. It is called the muscle master list. Those are all the muscles that you will be responsible for, right? So if we scroll down here, the muscle master list right there. And so maybe just to help you guys out a little bit in terms of the focus, I'll give you a couple of big hints here. Remember that all the muscles here, the face and neck, are pretty much identified. Will be asked to be identified. The muscles of the abdomen as well. I would recommend studying the muscles of the abdomen. I think the ones that you can start to when you're focusing on this, I think the thing I would say is focus from the trunk outward when it comes to the arms, legs, and all that. Focus on the trunk outward, and from proximal to distal when you're looking at arms and legs. So meaning that, you know, I definitely have pictures and identifications of muscles like, you know, let's start from proximal: deltoid, pec minor, pec major, rhomboids. These are all muscles that, lats, right? These are all muscles that I have identified and you have pictures of. However, it is the muscles that are a little bit more distal, right? The muscles that lay a little bit more distal, like here and here, that might not be as here. And that's it, really. That might not be identified, again, as extensively. These ones that I'm pointing out are ones that are definitely on. Same thing goes for the lower extremities. Ones that I wouldn't, again, these muscles here, psoas, iliacus, biceps femoris, semimembranosus, semitendinosus. Now, fibularis or perineals, I haven't quite made a question for yet, but then you've got glute max. These are all ones that are, you will see. Sartorius, maybe not extensor digitorum. Rectus femoris, yes. Soleus, yes. Not necessarily TFL. Yes, yes, and yes. So just a few that you, and these are the more distal ones. But again, it's going to be helpful to use this muscle master list to help identify, checking off all the muscles, making sure that you're familiar with them. So not all the muscles in the textbook, but you will be helped in terms of the muscle master list. That will be helpful. And so let me give you a little bit of a review here with the time that I have of some of the things that you should focus on as it relates to the exam here that's coming up. Turn my mic up just a little bit. And so let's take a look here. That's part one. Remember that part two will contain the pictures. So part two is 50 questions, whereas part one is going to be 75 1 point each. The practical or the pictures based portion of the exam, again, chapters 9, 10, and 11 will focus on will be 50 questions and have a little bit more value to each of them. You'll have less time as a result. But let's focus here on some of the things that we want to think about when it relates to chapters 9, 10, and 11. And so chapter 9 first is when we talked about joints and articulations. And so let me jump on that slide there. So there it is, joints and articulations. And so there was a couple of things here that we focused on when we talked about joints and articulations. We talked about the structural classification of joints. We talked about the functional classification of joints. And then we really focused on synovial joints or synovial joints. Specifically, we talked about the 6 types of synovial joints. Right? Those are the 6 types of synovial joints. They include joints like a hinge joint, like a ball and socket joint, a planar joint, a condyloid joint, a saddle joint. Those are the references that I'm talking about. And then we've also talked about in this section, a big portion was the body movements themselves. Now, I'm typing here that you'll see many of these questions as it relates to body movements on the practical, because that's where you will see them. Let me give you an idea here of what to look at when you're seeing that. Let me pop up a dashboard here that relates to Canvas, and I'll show you a couple of ones that you might look at. Let me actually, yeah. And so you'll give a body motion again. It'll be a single segment that we're identifying, and it'll be like, cervical flexion or extension, shoulder flexion, extension, abduction. You'll be asked to identify each of those different types of movements. I'm pulling up a couple of examples here that I have as it relates to those body movements. But you're going to see pictures of different types of body movements, and you'll be asked to identify them. Okay, here it is. So if I slide it up here onto my screen, make it really big. So you can see here, identifying a specific body movement, whether it's head or neck extension, like you can see on the picture here. Mandibular, right? And so when you identify this, let's really be specific with our anatomical terminology. So this would be mandibular retraction or TMJ retraction. You could even say, identify the bone or the joint itself. So let me pick one here that might be a little bit easier here. So this one is a little bit different. The question, make sure you read the question, but the question asks, please identify one muscle responsible for the indicated movement. So I'm not necessarily asking what the movement is, but we can identify the action as hip flexion. And if there's more than one muscle, then just name the muscle involved. And so the muscle here that would be involved is the psoas and iliacus muscles. These are both muscles that are involved in hip flexion. They actually go by a name of iliopsoas. And so that's kind of how you would do it. This one identifies the muscle. That's the muscle that you're going to identify, the iliopsoas or the psoas muscle. Again, now there's the body movement. So you would indicate hip flexion or even ankle eversion, right? Ankle eversion, plantar flexion, or this in the case is dorsiflexion. There is that plantar flexion, but the question now asks, what is a muscle involved in plantar flexion, right? Now, chapter 10 focuses on muscle tissue itself. So when we talk about Chapter 10, we're talking about muscle tissue. Remember that we talked about the 3 different types of muscles. So there is cardiac muscle, there is smooth muscle, and there is obviously skeletal muscle. And so skeletal muscle is voluntary. It has a unique shape as well as a unique number of nuclei. It has a lot of nuclei versus smooth muscle tissue and cardiac muscle, which has one. Cardiac muscle tissue obviously found in the heart, smooth muscle tissue found in the walls of hollow organs as well as in the digestive tract, attached to the erector pili muscle. The erector pili is the muscle. It's attached to your hair. And so we can find where do you find the location of each of these muscles, what is their structure, and which ones are voluntary versus involuntary is going to be a big component there. Then we looked at the anatomy of muscle, right? So remember that muscle is like your bicep is an organ. So the organ level, and it's bundled into a number of muscle fibers that are called fascicles. and then ultimately those fascicles make up, are going from bigger to smaller, I'm sorry. And ultimately we have the muscle fiber, which is the cell, right? Maybe we can even call this the tissue level, right? The fascicles is the tissue level. The microscopic anatomy is the structures associated with in the muscle cell. So think about the thick and thin filaments, myosin and actin, which one is which, what do they do, and how do they ultimately, how do they interact to initiate a muscle contraction. So what is their action? There we go. And so this is the steps of a skeletal muscle contraction. And it's primarily broken into three main concepts here. So those three concepts include the events at the neuromuscular junction, and that is, again, what I might call excitation. But your textbook might refer to it as the, the events at the neuromuscular junction. Then the second part here is the excitation, contraction, coupling. And finally, the cross bridge cycle. These are the major events that occur during a skeletal muscle contraction, and so you'd be asked to identify each of those major events, like what happens during the excitation step or the events at the neuromuscular junction, what is the steps that occur from excitation to excitation, contraction, coupling, and then finally this idea of cross-bridge cycling. What is that, right? This all leads to a concept that we refer to as the sliding filament model of a muscle contraction. And so it's the idea that, let's just make it in black, blue. It's the idea that the filaments actually slide amongst each other rather than any of those proteins getting shorter. They slide amongst each other. The thick filament pulls the thin filament across towards the midline, shortening the sarcomere. And so that is what we're looking at here in terms of the steps of a skeletal muscle contraction. And then finally, in chapter 11, there's really the big focus here on the different muscles of the body. Find my mouse. And so if we take a look at chapter 11 here, that is referred to as the skeletal system. Big focus here is going to be the concept of agonist, antagonist, and synergist. Muscles. What does that mean to be an agonist, antagonist, or a synergist? The agonist is the prime mover. The antagonist is the opposite muscle. And a synergist is a helper muscle, as I'm referring to those. So what are those ideas referring to? So we've got the agonist, antagonist, and then there's the concept of kind of like naming muscles. So muscles are named based on their muscles are named based on their location, their shape, as well as the general relative size, meaning like gluteus maximus, medius, and minimus. And so being able to identify the component that might be related to either the name that would be related to the name would be helpful. And so that's kind of where it comes into here, where we talk about the identification of particular muscles. And again, that is your master muscle list. You'll be asked to know the origin, the insertion, and finally the action of a muscle. So if a muscle has more than one action, I'll ask you to remember one of them. But the origin, often referred to as the proximal attachment point. The insertion, referred to as the distal attachment point. And finally, the action would be just like you would say, like, what is the joint? So name the joint, and then the movement, right? Or it could be the bone that's moving. So forearm flexion or elbow flexion would be both be sufficient in that idea. And so what you'll be seeing there is see if I got it here. Yeah, I do. Leave. And so what we'll see here is questions related to, again, the different muscles. So you'll get a picture of a muscle and you'll be asked, again, what is the origin? What is the origin? What is the insertion? And what is the action of each of those muscles? Muscles, there they are. And so like this one here, you'll see the pectoralis major. So the question here identifies the insertion or the distal attachment point, right? What is the distal attachment point? What bone is that? What portion of the bone is that? If you can find any of those landmarks, what is that landmark? So this is kind of like the proximal humerus, right? Right in the region of the intertubercular groove, the clavicle, the sternum, or the origin. So here is the origin, the proximal attachment point. You've got the proximal clavicle, the length of the sternum here, and then the action would be, this is a shoulder flexor as well as a shoulder abductor. So this would not only flex the arm, swing it forward, it would also adduct it, adduction. Let me type it so you guys hear what I'm saying. Of the shoulder, right? And so one action would be shoulder adduction. You can also say shoulder flexion. You could also even say medial rotation. Those are all actions of the shoulder. Let's go one more. Let's see if I got another example here for you. Spin it down here. Okay, yep. Remember, histology, identifying the different types of muscle tissues. There's an example there. This muscle here, what is the name of that muscle? What are these two? So you've got a picture of two muscles that are in the picture here. What are their names, or what are the muscles responsible for chewing or mastication? And so again, the practical is going to relate to identifying muscles, and then, as you saw previously, identifying the different actions of the body. Hope that's not for you. And so that concludes my announcements there, ladies and gentlemen. As I wrap up, I am ever most proud of you guys as you continue on in this semester, moving through the anatomy and physiology of the human body. And really, it's not an easy topic, but you guys are doing great. I continue to be motivated by your replies and responses through both email and homework and exams as well. You guys are doing great. But I encourage you guys, finish out these last 3 weeks strong. I know you can do it, and keep up the hard work. I look forward to all your responses as always.